Good morning all. So today we'll discuss about the state management in ASP.NET. We'll also discuss that what are the different state management techniques, when to use which technique, what are the advantages of this different state management and what are the limitations of this. So before that, the question is why state management is needed. So HTTP is a stateless protocol. What does it mean? So web server will not have any idea about the previous request of a client. Each and every request will be considered as the independent request. So there is no way to identify the previous client or a repeated client. Let me give you just one example for that in login page we provide the username and the password. And if we provide the correct username and the password, we should be able to access all the pages, like if you are using the Gmail, then inbox, sent item, even a settings and everything. But in each and every page, server will have to remember that this is a logged in user. So HTTP by default does not provide this functionality. So what we need to do is we need to use any of the state management technique. So in that case, specifically for the login, we use the session. So there are different state management techniques we have. So let's discuss that what are the state management technique we have in .NET. So we can categorize the state management technique in two parts. The server-side state management technique, where the data will be stored inside the server, so they are secure, and the another is the client-side state management technique, where the data will be stored in client machine. So there are two techniques which are server side. One is the session state and the application state, and the other client side state management techniques are cookie, query string and the view state. So we will discuss each of the state management technique one by one, but let me just give you an overview that in all these state management techniques we store generally a key value pair. Like in session state, when user provides the correct user and the password, then we store that email is equal to that particular email address of the user, and using that we identify that user is logged in if we have the key, that is email, in the session state. Like cookie for example, so again in that we store some details, that is client side. Let's say the advertisement sometimes that this particular product user has searched for, so we store that information and later on we use it. So all these state management techniques we store some key value pairs. Let's discuss about where it is applicable. So session state, right, specifically when the security is needed, let's say logging and payment and other things where the security is needed. But the thing is, remember that session is not is equal to login. Sometimes we have this that confusion that session is equal to login. No, it is not. Login is one of the application where we can use the session. Even if we are not having the login system, then also we use the session. Okay, but session is individual for individual user. So sometimes we want some common data across all the users. Again, it is we require the security in that, so we go for the application state. So that is the difference between session and the application. That session is individual for each and every user, while application state is common across all the users, but both are server side. Similarly, we have the other three state management techniques, which is client side, like cookie. Sometimes you go to the Flipkart or any other shopping cart website, you browse a particular product, and maybe the day after tomorrow or maybe after 1 or 2 days you go to some other website and you might get the same product in the advertisement. That is using cookie. So when you search, when you browse a particular product, at that time the cookie data will be stored inside your computer, and in advertisement in other website they use that cookie data and they market the same product. So that is the use of one of the use of the cookie. Even we can use it for like cart, shopping cart, right? So that is again not secure. We use multiple state management at same time also, right? The another example is when you open your Gmail login, at that time you are getting some saved that email addresses. That is again using cookie. Then there is a query string. So to understand the query string, let's open the browser, right? So if I go to my browser and I search for, let's open again Google, fine, and if I search for the cricket, I'm getting the answer results for the cricket. We search this for cricket in the previous page, and in this page we are getting this information, and this data has been passed inside the cookie, query string, right? So if I change it to the football from this, right, we will get the search result for the football. So this is a query string, right? So it will be appended into the URL. And to understand the view state, let's take one example, and there we will also discuss that what do you mean by that HTTP stateless protocol, fine. So in this default.aspx, what I have added is one button, one text box, another button, and one more text box, fine. So when user will click on this button, what I want is I want to make this background color to red or green, and when user click on this button, we will change the background color of this text box. So I have written this code that button 1 underscore click, that text box 1 dot background color, back color property we are using is equal to system dot drawing, is namespace, right, and color dot red. And for button 2 we are changing text box 2 background color to the green. Okay, so by default in .NET we have the state management technique called view state. So first of all, let's disable it. So I'll just change enable view state to the false. So there is no built-in state management even in .NET because we disabled it. So it will work like a PHP or other web applications, fine. And we'll see the output of this, that what will happen, that when user will click on the button 1, definitely this background color will be changed. So when I clicked on the button, ideally it is a post back, so request will go to the server, and in response we got this particular change with red background color of this text box. But when I click on this button, again it is a post back, so request will go to the server, and in response we will get this as green, but server will not remember anything regarding the previous state that this text box was red. So this is like HTTP stateless protocol, right? Even we click on this will become red, but this is now in original state, like with white background. Now in ASP.NET we have the built-in state management that is called view state. Again it is client-side state management technique. So if we will not disable it manually, by default we have this view state management technique, and we will get the correct behavior, I mean expected behavior, that when I click on this button it becomes red, and when I click on this button it becomes green, but again we are having the red also. So this data will be saved inside a hidden field that is called view state. So we'll also discuss all the state management techniques in detail. So this is what is called view state. This is query string which we are using. Let me give you the example for cookie. So when I open this Gmail, I'm getting few email addresses here, right? So this is because of cookie client side we saved. So every time when I open the browser from this computer, I'll get these three, this email addresses. Okay, so this is the example of cookie, all are client side, right? We can temper the data in that. And the server side is like when I click on a particular email address, I provide a password, and there the session data will be saved just to remember that the user is logged in. So that is the application of session state, fine. Okay, so now let's discuss one by one each of these state management techniques, fine. So first of all, server-side state management. So we have the session and the application, and in both, as I said, the data will be stored inside the server. Session is individual for each and every user, while application is common, fine. Okay, so what is exactly the session state? So in that, the data will be stored inside the server, and it is at user level. So it means it is different for each and every user. Session is active when you create a session, right? For how many seconds or how much time that particular session will remain active. So that depends upon the three different parameters. The one is until you close the browser. So as soon as you close the browser, session data will be destroyed. Second is, again, if there is a certain timeout that we can specify in our configuration file web.config. So let's say, for example, for 20 minutes, if you will not interact with the server, you will not send any request, during that particular time period, automatically that session will be expired. Fine. So sometimes in the banking application, in payment also, in booking, bus bookings, services, they use that expiration, right, as per their need. And the third definitely is when you manually destroy the session, right, session will be destroyed, like when you click on the logout button. Fine. So these are the three different ways. The question is how this session will be identified. Let me give you an example that, for example, we have 3 users and all are in login page. The one student, one particular user will provide a correct username and the password, and other 2 users, clients, will not provide the correct username and the password. And all 3 will send a request, will click on the login, so request will go to the server. Now how server will be able to identify in the further request that user 1 is logged in while 2 and 3 are not logged in. So what will happen in that case, that when first user will provide correct username and the password, that unique session ID will be created inside the server. So we will have one unique session ID for user 1 inside the server, and for user 2 and user 3 we will not have any session created inside the server. That is the first part. The second, again with the subsequent request, how server will be able to identify that the particular session ID is from which user. So what will happen, that as soon as the session ID will be created inside the server, that will be transmitted to the client via cookie. Fine. So user 1 will have one cookie which is having a particular session ID, and with all subsequent requests the user 1 will send that session ID to the server. And this is how the mapping will be done between the client and the server. So user 1 will be allowed to access all the pages, while user 2 and 3 is not having any session ID inside the server. So it will not they will not be able to access some pages which we will specify, right? So how to store the data into the session? So for that we have a built-in object of HTTP session state class, that is a session, and it is like a collection, so you can just access it like an array, that session and some key is equal to value, and this is how we store the data into the session. We have different methods also, so we can also use session.add, session.remove, session.clear. Fine. So we'll also discuss that part. And how to retrieve, so the reverse. So it is like how we store the data, the reverse, when you try to retrieve from it, right, you will get the data and we store it somewhere or we check it. If you want some global events, like whenever the session will be started, you want to perform certain action, and whenever the session will be ended, you want to perform certain action. So we don't know in which page the session will be started if I have the multiple code in multiple pages. So in that case we can use the global application class, that is called global.asax, and where we have the events like session underscore start, session underscore end. Fine. And there we write the code that whenever the session will be started, we want to perform certain action, or on the deletion of the session we want to do some we can say that the memory free or something like that. So that we can do in this global application class, global.asax. For a particular page we can restrict the session, that you don't want a session or you want only a read-only session. So in that page we will not be allowed to write something into the session, so we can use the page directive attribute, that is called enable session state. The 3 values, true, false and read-only, right? So by default it is true. If you want to deny the user, then make it false. You want to restrict the access, then you can use the read-only. This is about the session. Now we will come back to this, that there are different modes of the session, but let's take one example first to understand the application of the session. So I'm going to create one login page, that is ideally the best use of the session. So let's do one thing. Let's add a login page. Right click, add new item, select a web form, and we will use, let's say, login.aspx. okay, and we also want the consistent layout, so we will select the master page, which is main.master. Fine. So I'll add this page. So this is my login page. We are using the master page, so we are getting two content, as we had two placeholder in the master page with the ID head and the ID body. So similarly here we are using content placeholder ID head and content placeholder ID body. Okay. Now just to make it simple, what I'll do is I'll go to the register.aspx and I'll copy that entire code and will delete the other code which is not needed, because our login page we require at least email address and the password and this button also. Fine, this detail will not be required, so we'll remove it. So what we will do is let's copy this entire container. Fine. So okay, so this container I want to copy, so I just selected this entire container. Okay, and I'll paste it here. So we have the complete registration form in this login page. Okay, now what I want is I don't want any of this column in login. It is definitely not needed, so we can just delete rows. Even we will not have the server side code for this custom validator, so I also removed that custom validator also. That's changed from this register to the login. Fine, and the name is submit button, so we can use the same, we can continue with the same. The title we need to change here, that is in a div, so let's change it to the login, and we are done with the login page. Let's understand the code. That we have the bootstrap container, row and full column. We have one card inside the header, we have written the login, and then inside this body we have a table, right? In the first tr row, right, we are asking the user for the email address. Okay, so this for summary, yeah, first we added a summary, and then in second row we are asking the user for email address. We have multiple validation, the required field validator and regular expression validator. This is what we already discussed in registration form in last session. Fine, and then we have the password. Okay, and password text box. Fine, text mode is equal to password, and then we have the register button, and there we will write some code. We have to change that. Right, so now when I just find the event submit button underscore click, here we need to write our code for the login. So let's see the output of this first. Right, so it looks like a good login page. When I'll not enter anything, the validation will be triggered because we copied it from the registration page. But let's write a code, that is important, right? So now we'll also understand the database connectivity in that. Okay, so first of all I want to retrieve the data from the database. So again we'll write the same code. I want the system.data.sql client. Fine, so I want to create a connection command. Fine, so first of all we need to create an object of connection. So let's quickly create connection object. We need to give the connection string, but now today here we will discuss that how to retrieve that connection string from the web.config file. If you see in the register.aspx, we have written that connection string here. Fine, so if we write the same connection string again and again in all the pages, when we change our database server or maybe our database, we need to make changes everywhere. But we already have a web.config file, and it allows us to store the database connection string in that. So we already have this connection string because we use during the grid view and other control. So we have a connection string with the name as db in our web.config file, and we can make change here, and that will be applied to every page if we are using this connection string, right? So here let's see how to use that connection string. So if you want to retrieve the connection string from the web.config file, you need to use system.configuration namespace first of all, right? And in system.configuration namespace we have a configuration manager, right? So we'll use that class configuration manager, and there we have two properties. One is the connection string and the app settings also. We'll also discuss today what is app settings. So let's say the connection strings. Okay, so we can use these connection strings, and we can specify the name of the connection string as db. It is a collection. Fine, and from that I want a connection string. It can have the provider and other detail also. So I want the connection string. So this is how we can retrieve the data from the web.config file. So ideally we have the web.config file with the connection string name is db, and actual connection string we have added it here, and this is how we retrieve that. We added a system.configuration namespace, and there is a configuration manager class, and in that you can use, if I have multiple connection string, then different name, unique name we need to give here, and from that I want to retrieve the connection string. Okay, so this is how we can retrieve the connection string from web.config file, and it is a better way. So we'll not use this approach. Now onwards we'll use this. Okay, so we will open the connection. After creating the command we can do, but let's do it here. Connection dot close. So we are done with the first step, that we have a connection, SQL connection object. Now we want to retrieve the username, the password. Based on that, we want to determine that whether user has provided the correct username, the password or not. So there are multiple way of implementing this command. So I'll implement one of this way, that SQL command cmd, right, is equal to new SQL command. We need to give the command and the connection. Now as a command we can write a command like select password from student table, where username is equal to whatever username user has provided. So the different way of doing this. So simply I want right now that how many such users are there with the username is equal to, email address is equal to the provided email address, and the password is also same, right? So select count star, so it will give you the number of record. Just one value we will get, that is the how many such records are there. So count star from student, where email is equal to, now you can give some static value, but I don't want to use the static value. I want the user input, so I'll use the parameterized query here, right? So email is equal to @email, and let's say password is equal to @password. Now if we will not use parameterized query, sometimes we will face the problem that is called SQL injection. So let's see ideally what we do. So we write some username and the password. Let's just use this way, and then we will change to the this parameterized query. Fine. So email is equal to, let's say, ABC, and the password is equal to ABC. So only such record having email ABC and password ABC will be retrieved, but this will not work in this application. So we want some dynamic. So what we do is we concat using this plus operator. Fine. So what I did is single quote to enclose that values, and double quote to just complete this string, and then we will have some value, and the value will come from the email text box dot text. Okay, and similarly we'll do it for the password. So for password also we will retrieve the value from the password text box dot text. Fine, we'll get the desired output from this, but it is not preferable definitely. So now let's go ahead, let's see what happens, what is the problem. Okay, so it looks good, it is right, at least right now correct. Fine. So now to fire this query, right, we have three methods. One is called execute non-query. We were also using it in our registration form. You can see that we use the parameterized query there, and then we are using non-query. There is execute reader also, and execute scalar. Now when we are getting a single value using this aggregate function from this SQL query, right, we can use the execute scalar, right? So select maximum, for example CPI, select average, we can say that the salary, for example, or select count star. So in this select query we get only single value. Fine. So we can directly use the cmd dot execute scalar. Now what it returns is an object. The data type, return type, you can see it is an object, because this particular function will not have any idea that what exactly we are retrieving. If it is a average percentage, then maybe the float, right? In this case it is integer also. So it gives you the object. So what I want is, I'll store this record, I will store this value into a variable. Let's say the count is not valid, we need to cast it into the integer, because we have the object but we know it is integer. So I just casted it into the integer, and we stored it into the count. Now what will be the values of this count? Either 0 or 1 ideally, because the email is unique, we specified in the database. So either we'll have that email address or we will not have that email address. If the email address and the password both are matching, then count star will return 1, because there is only one record having that email and the similar password. And if the either email address is not matching and we are using the AND operator, so or the password is not matching, then we will get 0. So I can just write if count is equal to 0, fine, then do something, and if count is equal to 1, then do something. Okay, so if the count is equal to 0, right, then we can use this label. So let's see what is the name of this label. It is message label, fine, and we have not given any CSS class anyway, good, fine. So message label, I'll write that message label dot text is invalid credentials. Okay, and let's make it as a red color also. So I'll apply the CSS class as alert and alert danger. So these are bootstrap class, right? And as I said, we need to remember, so we can use it. And if it is not, let's say, I mean the username and the password is correct, so count will be the 1, right? So we can create a session here, or we can have different kind of functionality, but let's right now specify login successful, fine, and let's make it a success message. Okay, so we are not creating any session right now, so we have just a simple query. We are firing that command, select count star, we are concatenating the email address and the password. So if there is no such record available with the matching email address and the password, we'll say invalid credential, or we say login successful, and we close the connection. But user will be in this page only. We are not redirecting user to any other page right now. Let's see the output of this. So we have one record with, I guess, CCC in our database. So during grid view we inserted, right? And the password was also 6 times C. So when I provide the correct user and the password, when I click on login, it says login successful. Yes. If I add one more C here, so definitely that kind of data is not available. We have only 4 to 6 record, I think, right? And when I click on the login, it will say invalid credentials. So this is how we are validating the email address and the password. But the problem here is we are not using parameterized query. So if I use this trick, right? So I don't know what is the username and what is the password, fine. So I'm using some trick here, fine. But we have the validation control, that is good. So at least it will not allow you to enter this kind of data. Okay. So let's see if it allows. No, single quotes are not allowed. So SQL injection will not work in this, because some values like equal to and other are not allowed in this validation control, right? So space is also not allowed, fine. So to just demonstrate that what if we do not have even the validation, right? Let's see what happens, right? So for that purpose, what I'll do is temporarily I'll just remove this validation, right? So required, let's say it is also not needed as of now. Okay, so we just want to see that what will happen if we will not use the parameterized query. Okay, so this is my login form again, and let's use this trick that we use some data like this, okay, as a username. Now see, this is a not a good program, that we are not using even a validation, we are not using a parameterized query, and then somebody can hack your website. Otherwise it's really difficult for others to find out this kind of loopholes. So when I click on the login, it says login successful, though there is no such record in database. Even we don't know what is there in the database, but the only thing is we are not enclosing this particular single quote properly in our query. We are just using simple concatenation. We face this problem. User can log into the system even they don't know the username, the password they don't have, right? So this is called SQL injection. So what will happen, let me just explain that we have written this kind of code, and user in this particular value, user has given this value, and for password also user has given, right, so this value, okay, sorry, this value, fine. So the query will be like select count star from student where email is equal to 1. Definitely this is not available in database, but we have the or 1 is equal to 1, which is universal true. So ideally what happens, that this entire where clause is null. And again, where password is equal to 1, definitely it is false. There is no such password in database, but we have the ORing condition 1 is equal to 1. So ideally this is also removed. So my query becomes like select count star from the student, and there are, let's say, 500 records. So count is equal to 0, then and then it will say invalid credentials, otherwise it will give login successful. There are different things here. If we are using count is equal to 1, then and then user is allowed to log in, then also we can overcome. We have the validation control, then also user will not be allowed to enter that kind of records, fine. But best thing is we should use the parameterized query, right? So what we can do is, we had, let's go back to this. So we had this query, and instead of using this concatenation, I'll use the parameters. So wherever the value will be replaced, right, the single quotes will be enclosed, double quote, the invalid characters will be enclosed properly. So I have the password. So I specified two parameters, email is equal to @email and password is equal to @password. And now we need to, before we fire the query, we need to specify the value for these parameters. In registration also we were using the same, right? Because again, sometimes if you are using the address, for example, where we have special characters, it may create a problem. It's not about only the SQL injection. Sometimes even the data will be, the truncated, something like that, right? So it's better to use the parameterized query. So now I have to specify the parameters with value, and I'll specify that instead of email we will use email text box dot text, okay, and instead of password, fine, password text box dot text. So wherever this parameter value will be replaced, it will be replaced with proper encoding, fine. So we will not face any such problem now. So let's see the output of this, fine. For success and failure it will work similarly, but for SQL injection it will also give the wrong, fine. So let's use the correct username, the first testing, providing correct username, and it says, okay, let's see what is the problem. Okay, as for text box we forgot to give the text, okay, the value was not proper, so we were getting that. Okay, so let's fix it, and now let's see the correct username and the password. Okay, so it says login successful. If I enter incorrect username and the incorrect password, email address, it will say invalid credentials, and if I apply that trick here, then also it will say invalid credentials. So SQL injection will not work, right? In our case we had that validation control also, so few things like space specifically is not allowed in that. So anyway, user will not be allowed to enter it. So there are multiple way to overcome this kind of challenges, fine. Okay, now let's discuss about the session. So what I want is now that if user provides the correct user and the password, we will redirect the user to this particular page, which is our students, right? Then and then user will be allowed to access this particular page we had created, where we are using different that data controls, grid view, list view, repeater control, data list, fine. So what I want is that only logged in user will be allowed to access the students.aspx. So right now even I am not logged in, I can access it, fine. So I'll write some code in this page also that only logged in user will be allowed. But first of all, let's complete this login application that when user provides the correct username and the password, we will create a session. Okay, so I'll go back to this, and what we will do is we will store something into the session. So I can use session.add also, and there we need to provide a key value pair, right? Two parameters, or directly you can access it like a array. It is a collection, fine. And let's store the email address, and we will use this email address for two purposes. We will retrieve to give the message like welcome and the name, like in Visual Studio for example, if I am login, then I'm getting this my name also, so they have stored that name also, right? So similarly we are storing the email address, as we don't have the name or a username in our database, fine. So that is the email text box dot text. So we are storing that data into the session. So this is how we can store the session data, and then after we'll redirect the user to the students.aspx. So what we'll do is we will just use the response, and there is a redirect method, and there we can give the URL that is relative. So I'll specify student.aspx. Okay, so this is how we can store the data into the session. Okay, so this one line just we need to use as we discussed in the presentation. Now how to retrieve the data? So where exactly we want to retrieve in our application is in all such pages where we want only logged in users. So now in student.aspx I want only logged in users, no other users are allowed to access this page. So I'll go to the students.aspx.cs, and in the page load event itself we will check, right? So right now in the page load we have certain other code like retrieve the data and display it in a grid view, fine. So here I'll write the code to retrieve data from the session, fine. So how to retrieve the data, that is also easy, like how we store the data like this. So similarly we can use the same to retrieve, right? It is like an array or a variable simply. So first of all we'll check that if session of email is not is equal to null, or we can also write like is equal to null, then and then we will redirect the user to some other page. So user will not be able to access this page. So if the session of email is null, then we will redirect the user to the login page, fine. So what I'll do is here I'll write that response.redirect and redirect it to the login page, login.asp. So this is how simple login, where we check that whether user is logged in using this session data, then and then user will be allowed, and if it is null, it is not set, then we will redirect to the login page. So let's see how it works. So first of all let's go to the login.aspx. We already have the session because we tried it once. Let's see first of all how it works. Okay, so this login.aspx, let's try to open that students.aspx without login. So I'll open that students.aspx, and you can see I am also here again login.aspx. So there is no way to now retrieve the students.aspx. Again you open, you will be here, and when you provide the correct username and the password, fine. When you click on the login, fine, you are in this particular page. This browser functionality, they ask to save the password. I don't want right now. Okay, so this is how the login works. Now here I should have some logout button. Again I should have some indication that I am logged in. So I want to give some message to the user here, that welcome and then some name and the logout button. We can put it in a master page also, and we can put it in other page also, fine. So what I will do is in student.aspx, let's go to the CS file, that aspx file, right? And here I want to put before this that there is one label where I'll display some message, and there is one button for logout, fine. So I'll put a label and one button. Okay, so before this grid view we have this label, so we will display some message to the user, and we will have, let's say, logout button, fine. So for this label, let's change the name of this label is email label, where we'll display, or welcome label, whatever it is, and default I don't want anything, so I'll just make the text to the blank, and this button is logout. So if user is in this page, then user will be able to see this, and we are also checking the session. So there is a logout button. Fine. Now on the logout button click event, we'll write the code to destroy the session. So there are different methods of the session HTTP session state class, that session.clear. Now what it will do, it will remove all key value pairs from the session state. Session ID will not be deleted. Session ID will remain as it is. It will just remove all key value pairs. And if you want to destroy the session entirely, so you can use this abandon method. It cancels the current session. So it is like difference between this clear and abandon is something like clear. We have some books on the desk and we remove all the books from the desk. And if I call the abandon, it is like we just throw the desk itself along with all the books. Fine. So we'll not have desk at all. So session.abandon will destroy everything, session ID and everything. So on the click event, we are just using session abandon, and we will redirect the user to the login page after logout. So again we will write the same response.redirect login.aspx. Okay. So when user click on the logout, we will destroy the session and user will be redirected to the login page. And here, if user is logged in, we want to change the text of that message, email label. So email label dot text is equal to, let's say, welcome, and I can use the concatenation here, that welcome and the name of the email address of user. So on the page load, we are giving the welcome message if user is logged in. If it is not logged in, we'll redirect anyway to the login.aspx. Okay. So let's see one more time that what we are getting. We are already logged in, so we can access the students because we are not closed the browser, right? So my session will remain as it is. So we are getting welcome and then something. So we can display it here also. If we put it in master page, we are having the master page, and then we have the logout button. So when I click on the logout button, session will be destroyed and I'll be redirected to the login. Now let's see how this cookie stores the session ID. So we can just use this browser functionality. We can go to this application tab, and here we can store the cookie. So let's first of all see there is a session ID. Fine. And this is a unique session ID. Using this particular client will be identified inside the server. Okay. So if I open, this is in a different browser, right? Let's open it here in the other browser. Let's see if we will log in here, we'll not be able to see that login page in this other browser because it's another client. I'm just demonstrating that. So when I enter the correct user and the password, I'll be redirected to a particular page. So this is my session ID and I'm logged in. So server will remember me using this session ID, right? And I'll store this, client will store this session ID in this particular cookie. So this is a cookie. But if I open the same page using another browser, this is another client, fine, I'll be redirected to the login page because there is no session ID for this particular client inside the server, and even in cookie also, definitely, right? So this is how the session works. So let's click on the logout button and we'll be redirected to the login. Okay. Fine. Next is there are different session modes where the session data will be stored. Fine. So there are three session mode we have. The one is called in proc, right? So okay, fine. So there is a one session mode which is called in proc, where the session data will be stored inside the process where that website is running, right? So your IIS, right? So in the same process, the data will be stored inside the server. Now what is the advantage and the disadvantage of this mode in proc is, if we restart our application or we recycle it, right, then in that case session data will be destroyed. There is a disadvantage, and the advantage is it is very fast. But if you have sometimes that web farm, right, so where multiple website we have in single server, or we have single website on multiple servers, this will not work. So in that case, what we have to do is we have to use the another session mode that is called out of process, or we call it as a state server. Now how to do this change? So we can change it using web.config file, because our configuration is in web.config. So in web.configuration file, in system.web, we have to specify that session state and the mode. There are 5 modes actually, right? So mode is equal to in process, then there is a state server. Now when you use this state server, the separate process will store the data, and you need to go to the services and you need to start this ASP.NET state service. This is a process. So by default it is stopped. So if I use this and right now I run this, it will not work. So what I can do is I can start this process, and in this particular process the session data will be stored, which is different than your web application process, right? So that is called out of process or separate process or a state server is another mode. So even if your application will be restarted, it will be recycled, the session will remain intact because it is in a different, data is in different process. Again, here the data will be stored inside the memory, because process, right, they use the memory RAM. But sometimes you want data, persistent data, you want to store it in a database, then the third mode you can use is a SQL server. So if you use this SQL server, the data will be stored inside the SQL database, right? In that case, you need to specify where is the database. So you need to specify the SQL connection string, and there we need to give the connection string, and before that you need to create a database. Now how to create a database? So we can go to the C drive, Windows, Microsoft.NET, right? I am using 64 bits of framework 64, the different version of .NET framework, right? So right now we are targeting 4, right? And here you will find some SQL file like install SQL state.sql. So this is a SQL that query for creating the database. So first of all we need to run this. There is a that application also to run this. So using that you can create a database, and then after creating the database you can give the connection string of that database here. So in that case the data will be stored inside the SQL server. Definitely the advantage is session, we can store the very large data into the session because we are using the database, but at the same time it is very slow as compared to other 2 methods, right? So these are the 3 session mode. You can completely disable the session using off, and you can also have the custom session mode where you, for example, you want some Oracle database to store the data into the session data into the database, fine. So mainly there are 3 modes, like in process, out of process, we call it a state server, and a SQL server, fine. Okay, the other, right now let it be in process. Okay, so other session configuration variables are, we can specify the timeout also, right? So let's say the timeout 20, you can change the timeout also. You can specify the cookieless session. Now what is this cookieless session? So sometimes the cookies are disabled in a browser and you don't want that to use the cookie, for example, then you can specify the cookieless session. So there are multiple way of cookieless, that if it is available or not, then auto detect is also fine. But sometimes explicitly you want that I want a cookieless session, then you can specify cookieless to true. Now let's see what happens. In cookieless session, that session ID will not be saved inside the cookie. Right now we are using the cookie to store the session ID. So sometimes I don't want to store. So first of all, let's do one thing. Let's delete these 2 cookies from this. Okay, so I don't have any cookie here, will be created because we are using the session, fine. But yeah, you can see here that session ID will be passed through the query string URL. We are not having any cookie. So even if we log into the system, fine. And if I click on the login, fine, I am in this particular page where we are checking that user is logged in or not. Yes, fine, but you can see there is no cookie. So this is called cookieless. So how the session ID will be passed to the server? So that is via URL automatically, right? So this is called cookieless session, where we are not using cookie for using the session. So what we have to use is definitely the URL query string. So log out and everything works good, fine. So this is called cookieless session. We can specify that parameter also, fine. There are different properties of the session also, like we can see that how many variables, keys are there in the session. So we can use the session dot count, fine. So it gives the how many keys we have into the session, whether you want to check whether it is a cookieless or not. So we can, here in programming also we can check it is cookieless or not. Then there is a mode also. Here also we can use this property. We can use the timeout here also in the code behind timeout property. We can remove a particular key from the session using this remove, fine. You want to remove all, so it is similar to the clear. And sometimes you want explicitly to access the session ID. You can also access that. For example, you want to display the session ID somewhere, or you want to access it for your purpose. You can also use session ID property, right? So this is all about session. Let's go to the presentation. We discussed that how to configure the session using web.config file. So we can specify session state, cookieless, mode, timeout, right? And by default the cookie name is something like ASP.NET Session or something like that. So you want to change the name of that cookie, you can change the name also using cookie name. So session ID will be stored with the name my site, right? So that will be the cookie name, so you can change that. Okay, so we discussed the important that attributes, the timeout, by default what you want as a timeout, right? Then the mode, we discussed that in process, state server, SQL server also, and we discussed what is cookieless session. So this is all about the session. Few things that we need to remember, that we should not save too much information in the session, right? Because what will happen if we store too much information, it is individual for different user. If we store entire paragraph and let's say we have 1000 user, you can imagine how much space we are wasting, fine. Ideally we should not store too much information in any of the state management, right? Only needed things